The deaf community is very diverse. It makes us very interesting.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hello, my name is Mary Pickering, and I am a case manager here at Deaf Community Services, and it's really nice to meet you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Hi, Ruth. Good morning. My name is Melissa Dove, and I'm also a case manager here at Deaf Community Services. It's nice to meet you too.
My name is Ruth, and I'm a resident here at Gentry Park Senior Living in Bloomington, Indiana, and I've been here about 2 years.
I have a question for you. Have you ever met a deaf person before, Ruth?
Not totally deaf. Well, I work with an individual, and she's also a very good friend who is very, very hard hearing and has great difficulty trying to get apparatuses or hearing aids that will actually work. And so, but when I meet with her, I try to talk to her and look so that I can see her face and see her mouth, and also.
Lip read, so to speak.
I'm sorry?
It's kind of like lip reading.
Well, not so much, but maybe more than I think it is. I might be.
So this is your first time actually meeting a deaf person who uses ASL to communicate?
Correct.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Okay. So I'm from a very large deaf family. My parents are deaf. My grandparents were deaf. So a very strong generational deaf family. And we have that family history of deafness. So very ingrained deafness, the culture and everything, my whole life. And the same with Melissa.
Yeah, I would say I'm second generation deaf that I know of. I have a daughter that's hard of hearing. But I was raised in a school for the deaf.
That must be very, very interesting. So
Yeah.
how do you communicate with someone away from your school that's not hard of hearing or deaf?
There are several different ways that we could communicate. Most of the time it would be written communication, passing the paper back and forth. Sometimes I would try to gesture with the individual, but if that doesn't work, we go back to writing back and forth.
And then nowadays we also use our phones, texting or typing back and forth. And if I come into contact with a person unexpectedly, like maybe at a doctor's appointment, then I'll request a sign language interpreter for that appointment to help me communicate.
Does it take a lot of thought to form your words?
No, I think that that's just part of our norm, our everyday normal life. It's how I grew up, and I, of course, learned from my parents, and that's just kind of what we do.
And it's kind of natural for us because we were born to do that. We grew up that way. But it is more challenging for the hearing individual.
Yeah.
They're usually stunned sometimes and shocked. like not sure how to communicate with that person, the deaf person. So it's more challenging for the other person usually. And it's our job to make sure they're comfortable and show them how to communicate. So that's usually what we do. That's the challenging part.
Yeah, one example is closed captioning on TV. I get asked quite often how I can watch and read at the same time without missing out on what's going on. But because I grew up with it, it's just so native to me that I don't feel like I'm missing anything.
Well, that's wonderful. But what happens if you, like, if you would come to this facility and come to see me or come to see Sarah? How would we be able to communicate with you? Except for writing. Since I don't speak in, they're doing a class here in Gentry on hearing.
Cool.
It's really, yeah, it's and the person who's teaching it took it in school for, I believe, 2 years. And it's several people in the class do so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I don't know anyone here. I mean, a lot of us, I'm hard hearing. But, you know, I keep saying, what did you say? And to people to hear so that I can understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And, but as far as being totally deaf, I don't know of anyone here I have not met them, if there is anyone here who is totally deaf. And it could be that they're just stay in their rooms, I'm not sure, so I guess we need to try to reach out to.
Maybe.
And so, and I think that the class that they're having now is going to be a big, maybe a big help.
It could be fun for you to meet that person and maybe learn some signs.
Well, yeah, they do, yeah. I was in the class for, I don't know how many weeks, and but then I dropped out of the class because my memory is terrible. And I couldn't remember one day to the next, you know, what, because we have papers and it, you know, what an A is and, you know, and by and different things. But so I may see if I can get back in it now. So this has kind of piqued my interest more. So.
It's good to have that motivation.
And Ruth, don't feel bad. It usually takes a hearing person 7 years to become fluent in sign. ASL is difficult. It's not easy. And once you are involved in the community, you pick it up a lot faster, but sometimes between 7 years, but it's hard. It's a difficult language, not easy to learn. So don't feel bad at all. Just do your best.
Well, I would think that would be very, very difficult to do because so I'm 97 years old, so I don't know that I have 7 years left.
97, you're beautiful. You look great.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I just turned 97, so yeah. But
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah, happy
Well,
belated
thank
birthday,
you.
Ruth.
yeah, thank you very much. It's everybody here is really real nice, and we have a big birthday party for everybody that had a birthday in the month, at the end of the month.
Very nice.
Yeah,
That sounds like fun.
yeah, they take good care of us. So I just
Really good to know.
and,
I want to go back, Ruth, to your first question. If we were to come and visit you there, more than likely,
We could write back and forth.
and we could write back and forth, or we would probably bring someone with us that can sign and voice for us as the interpreter
Yeah.
to make communication more fluent. But if it was just an impromptu visit, it would probably be writing back and forth.
Yeah, or if somebody there invited us to come, then more likely there would be a formal request for an interpreter in preparation for our visit. It just really depends on what it is.
That would be nice. Maybe you could come to our class.
Maybe.
We should. It'd be fun.
I think that would be a fun field trip. Bloomington is a nice area too.
Yeah, well, we think so. It's still cold though, right now. We keep thinking spring is coming, but I'm not sure when, so. Anyway, well, in the questions that Sarah
Up and
gave.
down.
I'm sorry.
The temperature goes up and down.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, the weather's fluctuating lately, but this Saturday, it's supposed to be 80 degrees.
I know, isn't that crazy? Yeah, so
That's Indiana for you.
that's true, that's true. But in the questions that I was given to look over, and it says, do you know of anybody in the, I would say, back, not as far back as Washington, but say, well, even in the last 50 years, that anybody in big offices that had hard hearing. I know way back, I know you see movies of old times and you see people with these hearing things in their ears, they look like a trumpet. And is anybody back in our history? Were they anybody in office that was deaf that you know of? Like.
Yeah, I think there were several that I could remember. Do you remember Thomas Edison?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And he was
deaf. He was deaf in one ear.
Oh.
The hard of hearing. Yeah, he was the inventor, so he was deaf. He was very focused on inventions, so that's really cool.
Yeah, it's great.
And then I'm sure you're familiar with Helen Keller. She was deaf and blind. She's very well known.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, very.
Yep.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but I didn't realize that she was also deaf, so.
Yep. Yeah,
Or-
deaf and blind.
And
Yeah,
Beethoven.
So. And then, is this quite genetic then? Are you talking about your families? That there are people in your family?
Me? Are you talking about me?
Yeah. Was
Well, for me, definitely. My family has a CL6 gene. C26, I'm sorry.
I can't remember what the C stands for.
And I can't quite spell that gene, but it's definitely genetic. And it runs in our family. My mom and dad both have that gene. So we have a deaf family. So it's not only, that's not the only reason that people become deaf. There are various other reasons, from illness, at birth. Some people become deaf later in life.
Yep.
There are a variety of reasons that cause deafness, but mine just happens to be a very unique situation. There's only about 10% of us that are born from a deaf family. Most people are born from a hearing family. So mine is unique.
For me, my mom and dad were deaf, but I'm not sure about the previous generations. My mom's mom was a Holocaust survivor. And so we think that probably during that time, because of some forced vaccinations, that caused deafness in the family. And then my uncle and my grandfather, they never really knew, but so that's how, we're not really sure where it came from in our family.
So how old was your mother, you said? That was in the Holocaust? How old was she?
It was my mom's mom, so my grandmother.
Oh,
I
okay.
want to say she has 3 sisters. I'm trying to think of the age. I would say it was probably back in the 20s. They were all survivors of the Holocaust, but I want to say it was back in the 20s, 30s. My grandparents didn't know sign language, and so we never really were able to have that deep conversation and get that knowledge. It's a really interesting story. I would love to share it with you, but probably at another time. But we saw photos of them and have that documentation of them in the Holocaust.
When you come to visit.
Yes, sounds good.
Yeah, that's really quite something. So anyway, so let's see. And I know some of the other questions. One was, how do you appropriately get the attention of someone who is deaf? I mean, you just get in front of them and speak, or what? Just how do you manage to do that?
Well, not necessarily getting right in front of them to speak, but a lot of people, some deaf people that are, on the spectrum can hear just a little bit. They might be hard of hearing. It just depends. A person with a hearing aid or might have a cochlear implant. But I think when we go back to getting attention, if you can always tap somebody on the shoulder, you could flash a light, you could also wave.
Yeah, definitely flashing lights off and on to get their attention. And a light tap, not a hard tap. And definitely the wave, getting someone's attention that way.
Well,
And we are very, very visual individuals. We have sharp eyes. We're, we can look everywhere. I very much depend on my visual.
Yeah, also pounding on the table or stomping on the floor is another option too, but in appropriate situations, like if you're at home or with family and friends, that would be good. I probably don't, it wouldn't be good to stomp on the floor in my office while I'm at work.
oh my. Well, I know like here, if a fire alarm goes off, I mean, I can't visualize anybody not being able to hear it. It's absolutely, it's very, very screechy. And, but a person that's.
I couldn't hear it.
Can't hear it, so.
No, I don't think I would be able to hear that alarm, Ruth.
But in our rooms though, their lights flash. There's flashing lights as well.
That is what we would
There's
depend on.
flashing lights, and so that would, I think, would definitely get someone's attention.
Definitely with the strobe lights would get our attention.
And of course, then somebody goes and knocks on people's doors as well. So, so that's a very important thing. So, and like but you can see though. So that's the thing that.
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
That's a big plus, right?
You are right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heavily depend on our sight. But we do have a small population of individuals who are deaf blind.
Yes.
So it is a challenge.
Mhm.
And some that might have what we call low vision, they can see just a little bit. Then some individuals will have Usher syndrome too, which can be common.
And those individuals have a different way to respond to emergency situations. They may have someone come and tap them because the light wouldn't be effective, but they have different ways. But we heavily depend on our vision. And even in my home, I have different lights installed for the fire alarm and for different emergencies. I was cooking one time and I burned something, so smoke was everywhere. And so the lights and the sirens were going off. You know, you couldn't miss the lights. Even if you were sleeping, you could not miss seeing the lights flashing. So that's really important.
Well, it seems like if driving in traffic would be hard. Sometimes it's kind of good if you got somebody in back of you honking their horn. Maybe it'd be nice if you didn't have to hear them, so. But
You're right about that.
Yes.
But sometimes when I'm driving, somebody will pull up beside me and I can tell that they're mad, but I don't know. I'm like, I didn't hear anything. I don't know what you're so upset about.
well, you
And just
know,
like with lightning and thunder, people are like, oh, I
Right.
didn't sleep well because of the storm all night. I'm like, really? There was a storm? I slept right through it. It was fine. So there are some pros and cons.
Yeah.
well, that's, yeah, one of the questions was, I'm gonna have to read that about it. The answer was positive or negative. And, how has the pandemic affected the community of deafness?
Well, I think that, you know, sometimes when I go to the doctor, you know, they definitely negatively, we have all these masks. Everybody's been wearing a mask. And so before I could read a person's lips and know when a nurse was calling my name to come into the doctor's office, but that's been a challenge with the mask on.
Also, during the pandemic, the deaf community heavily relies on social interactions, getting together in person. You know, again, we're a very visual community. We like being around each other in person, being able to interact. And during the pandemic, we couldn't do that. We had to really minimize that and get together with small groups. So a lot of us felt extremely isolated for a long time. We couldn't be around people, and it was very impactful to us, especially individuals who lived alone. They were very impacted. You know, there was no human connection. Felt very disconnected and lost, and became very lonely and depressed. So the pandemic impacted us greatly.
But thank God for technology. We've got video phones and FaceTime and Zoom like this. That has been a positive outcome of the pandemic. So it's not the same as in person, but it definitely helped.
And the number one thing that has impacted the deaf community is the use of masks. You know, if I go to a public place, I typically, you know, if a hearing person was trying to communicate with me, I could depend on lip reading. You know, I wasn't fully able to understand them completely, but it was a tool that I could use, trying to catch some of the words that they would say and make that connection to what they were saying. But with the mask, I was completely lost. I could not communicate. We had to write back and forth. And so that was a really tough part. You know, it made our life a little bit more challenging, and it was time consuming.
Yeah, and sometimes there's misunderstandings because of the mask. I would think that a person was talking to me and then realized that they might have just been talking on their phone or chewing gum or something like that, and they weren't even wanting to get my attention or talk to me at all.
And, you know, we definitely depend on facial expressions to identify how a person's feeling or what the behavior is. Got the furrowed brows, they're happy, but with the mask, you can only see half of their face. And so you're not sure. I don't miss that.
No, I don't either.
That would make life very difficult for me. So, you know, because we're just so used to hearing things, even though my hearing is not too great, but with the hearing aids and different things that they have now, that a lot of it can be can be remedied. So so it's it's another thing to be very grateful for. So And yet at the same time, it seems to me that the things that they have done for the deaf community has been something to be very grateful for too. You know, for your families and for everybody, all the communities. So, and because I can imagine that, you know, just like in our community, you know, the waiter comes to the table and says, you know, what do you want to order? And you know, so I don't know, what would you do with the menu then? Point to what you want to have, or
Yes.
Most of
Yeah.
the time.
most of the time would count. Yeah.
And if I need to change my order, like I want to order something with, you know, a little bit different than the menu, then I'll write it out on my phone.
And I'm sorry. What did you say?
I said, sometimes if I want to modify my order
Mhm.
a little bit differently, like if I want to remove, like add something to my sandwich, then I will type it out or write it out to them.
Oh,
So some waitresses or waiters are really good at gesturing and taking time to communicate with me. And then I know I can gesture and communicate really well. But if a waitress seems to be in a hurry, then I just write it out real quick or type it out on my phone. Depends on the person. But again, we're used to that. It doesn't feel, it's just a way of life, how we order.
And it just depends where we're at. Like I live in Fishers, and Fishers is a heavy deaf community. So they are well aware and they've already been exposed to the deaf community. And so they're used to gesturing more and they're very interested and they're not like deer in headlights, just frozen. You know, if I go on a trip, on vacation, I pull over in a rural area, a lot of times they're stunned. They've never seen a deaf person before. And so it's very interesting to see how people react and how they handle us. It's fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a lot of work.
And sometimes some people, I remember one time I drove through Illinois on a trip, or maybe it was going to Iowa. And I ran across an individual and they were, you know, just really taken aback. And I'm like, it's okay. You know, we just went ahead and placed our order. You know, we had everything ready, already written out.
And, you know, technology now, we're so advanced. Some restaurants already have touchscreen menus that you can order from, Starbucks. I can't think of what else, Dunkin' Donuts. You can order from an app. And so I can already place my order. And when I arrive, I can pick it up and go without having to go through that communication. So technology, compared to 10 years ago when I was in college, we didn't have that. I had to write back and forth and gesture, but it's a lot easier now. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I think we have it a lot easier than our parents.
You know, technology's helped a lot of ways. And for the deaf community, it's very, very much positive.
yeah, you think about Edison then and what he was going through if he couldn't hear. And he was trying to work with people, that would have been us. We're lucky we have the phones today, I guess. So
You're right.
yeah, so you know.
Yeah, and speaking of, you know, my parents' time, they didn't have that at all when they were young. You know, they had no technology. So my children, they'll be fine. It'll be easy for them.
Oh, I agree.
But I work as a case manager and I work with a variety of deaf individuals. And I notice a lot of the older individuals I work with, they struggle with technology. You know, they have a hard time learning and understanding how to use that technology. So it's a little bit of a negative for them, but it just depends. So I have to teach them how to use the phones or an app or a video phone and make sure I educate them, and then they go through that process.
Well, see, I go through that process when I'm not very good
I'm
And-
sure.
I go, you know, I'll go to Sarah and ask her different things and for me. And then I'll say to my friends something or other about, I didn't quite understand how I do something with, I have an iPad and,
It's not easy.
and they say, well, just ask one of the kids that comes in your room, you know, the aides. I refer to them as kids. And anyway, so that's right. When they come in my room, I can ask them about most anything. And if they can't, they'll say, oh, so-and-so knows how to do that. She has one of those, you know, so I understand what it's like, so.
Or you ask the grandchildren.
I'm sorry,
Or you ask the grandchildren.
I don't have any children. Yeah, this is what so many people say to me. You say, well, you got to ask your grandkids usually because it's my age. But and I say, well, I don't have any children and I don't have any grandchildren. So, but I can ask most anybody here and they can usually help you. So,
Yep.
but
Really
and
nice to have that support there.
yes,
People who are willing to help you.
oh yeah,
Technology is not easy to learn. Some of the new technologies I can't keep up, so I couldn't imagine what it would be like for you.
yeah. Well, it's and I have this friend who swore up and down that she was never going to learn how to she wasn't going to get a phone. That was it, because she drives a lot, you know, and she goes zooming up to her. She's got about 18 dozen grandkids, and she goes up and visits her family and everybody. And I was always worried about her driving because and because she's kind of an erratic type person. I love her dearly, but yeah, she says she refused to get a phone. And finally, I think some of her kids bought one for her and made her use it because they worried about her like I do. And so
Right.
that, but now she can run circles around me with it, you know, so, but I don't think she swears she'll never get a computer though, so anyways. But she'll probably be one of these days. So how else, what else can we do then besides the class on hearing signs and all, so. Can you do that?
One thing, the classes are a great start, but I think too, learning ASL, learning about just the deaf community and deaf culture, you know, like we talked about, we would love to come out and if we were to meet, we would be able to teach ASL.
And you can support the deaf community by being more aware, you know, just being aware of our community, because there are a variety of individuals in the deaf community. We come from different backgrounds, different upbringings. There are some that never learned to sign, and then some learn to sign later in life, and some are oral. So be very open-minded about the community, making sure to try to fit that individual's needs. You know, for me, it would be great if you had an interpreter ready so that we can communicate and make things more accessible for us.
Yeah, I would agree. And not having or feeling sorry or having pity for a deaf person, because we're proud to be deaf.
I think that's it. I don't know what else. And don't try to fix us. That is a pet peeve, you know, support us and be more accepting of us and our preferences, our culture, our language. Support us regardless, just what we want. You know, we have, you know, a history of people trying to fix us and being very oppressive. and cutting ASL, no communication, forcing us to learn how to lip read. And I think now people are more aware, but there are still some areas that people do it.
Yeah, like when my parents were born, they only gave one option of getting a cochlear implant or going to school and learning how to speak and talk. But now there are so many more options that are really better.
I'm sure there are more, but I can't think of them.
What then is your job? I'm trying to figure out what I want to say. How difficult is it for a deaf person to find work and out in the world?
That's a good question. I'd say it's probably maybe 50-50. Once you find a job with a company, then a lot of, you're up in competition against individuals that can hear, and maybe somebody that, you're in competition with somebody who, they always say, well, they can't talk on the phone. So you really have to go that extra mile to prove that you are capable of meeting the job responsibilities.
And it really depends. Let me ask you a question, Ruth. If you were to hire someone, you had a hearing person that could speak fluently, everything was accessible to them, or if you had a deaf person that could not speak, but could communicate well, was very friendly, social, a lot of the individuals would want to hire the hearing person. It's easier. They would choose that person out of ease of access instead of having to get an interpreter and having to communicate those. There are a lot of factors involved with that decision to hire the hearing person. So from our experience, we've seen a lot of deaf individuals who struggled to get employment. Interview skills may not be well rehearsed. They haven't had that background. They're really behind in that information, not sure how to answer appropriately different questions. And so they need that support and have that information ready to do that. So just a lot of factors.
Yeah, educational background too.
I said before, the deaf community is very diverse. People come from different backgrounds, different language, communication styles. Their experiences are different. Extreme diversity. It makes us very interesting.
You're right.
And so for employment, I think a lot of times hearing people have more access. And nowadays, it just depends where you are. If it's a big city, people have more exposure to the deaf community and what their needs are, and they're more willing to make things accessible for the deaf person. But it just depends. If it's a rural area, they don't have that exposure or that education, so they may freak out a bit.
So then if you're hiring someone, is there anything that's about discrimination? Or do you fall under any of those categories of, discriminating against people? Because, if somebody, as you said, the hearing person might get an interview and a non-hearing person wouldn't get an interview. Do you have any kind of recourse in that situation in the community of deaf people?
Yes, we have an organization here, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that an individual could file a complaint if they felt like they were discriminated against. And you have to provide documentation, like if an individual lost their job, they'd have to document why they felt discriminated against, or if something else happened and they wanted to file a suit, then there is that option, but sometimes it can be difficult to prove discrimination, but it just varies.
Yeah, and a lot of times the individual and the hiring process, we never know. You know, you interview the person and they'll say, I'll contact you in a week. And you're left unknowing who got hired and who didn't. But once a person would get hired, if they did not provide an interpreter or provide different equal access opportunities for the deaf person, then the person could sue them or file a complaint against discrimination because I didn't have the same access as the other employees.
Yep.
Interesting, yeah. So it's a difficult life in many ways then. As you say, but you're much better off than your parents were. Anyway.
You're right about that.
Yeah.
For sure.
So now, do you both have children?
Yes.
Are they,
Yes.
they also deaf?
My 3 kids are all deaf.
Yeah.
Yes, and I have 2 kids. One is hard of hearing, and she has learned to sign and she can speak some. And then my other child is completely hearing. We call her, she's a CODA, which stands for Child of a Deaf Adult. And so she is growing up in a bicultural, bilingual home where she's learning ASL and English, and then also learning the deaf culture alongside that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have organizations that specialize in the deaf community. So there are schools like the Indiana School for the Deaf. There's also the Indiana Association for the Deaf, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for the deaf community. And then there are a few more. There are a lot of organizations nationwide that serve the deaf community that people can support and find online. There's also donations available for, like people will pick an organization on Facebook to solicit for donations.
And there's camps.
So the one thing I remember so well is during the pandemic, the governor had meetings every week for a while and then cut down. And they always had someone signing language. And then it would be nice if the people, say the governor, or say, would mention that person, and maybe at some time they did mention, because there were different people, but very often it was one person I remember quite well. So it was always seemed to be there. So
The governor's interpreter was a CODA too.
okay.
His name is Andy Rourke.
Andy what?
His name is Andy Rourke.
Rourke?
Yep.
Spelled R-O.
His last name is spelled R-O-R-K.
R-O-A, yeah.
And he became an interpreter by profession, which is kind of unusual, but he signs really well. And I mean, it makes sense because he grew up in a deaf family. His parents are deaf.
And I'm happy that you recognize that. A lot of times, if there is a state emergency or some serious disaster happening, they are required to have an interpreter there on the TV screen so that you'll see that. And it's really nice so that everyone has access to that information immediately.
Because not all deaf individuals can read the captions and understand when those briefings are happening. So it's nice to have it available in American Sign Language.
Yes, I thank you very much, Mary and Melissa, both, and also you. And so now all of you are welcome to come and visit us. And we would really, really like to have you come and talk to our boss, Tammy. I don't even know Tammy's last name. But anyway, it would be very nice of that to do that. And I think the people would be real interested. We have some people who are more interested in others than others and that, but they appreciate knowing what's going on in the community. So thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ruth.
I'll do the
Hopefully you
Queen's
learned
Rule.
something today.
Thank you.
And I think to myself,